J'ouvre la séance, mais
I call this meeting to order now. Welcome to meeting number 14 of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on February 8, 2022, the committee is meeting to continue its study on survivor pension benefits, marriage after 60.
the meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware that the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I would like to take the opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshot or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly, and when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. En ce qui concerne la liste,
With respect to the list of speakers, the clerk and I will do our best to maintain the established speaking order for all members, whether they are attending the meeting in person or remotely. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. There are a number of them who are here for the first time, so I'd like to welcome them. We have, as an individual, Patrick Boudreau and Kelly Van Cugnet. I apologize if the pronunciation was incorrect. Tracy Lee Evanshan and Kevin Sewell Corporal.
de la
And from the Surviving Spouses Pension Fairness Coalition, we have Maurice Gill, co-chair.
The witnesses will be provided with the 5 minutes of the opening remarks, and then we will go into rounds of questioning. Et je vais vous aviser.
And I will inform you when you have 1 minute left, and when your time is up, I will advise you as well.
Now we will begin with Patrick Boudreau. Please, Mr. Boudreau, you have 5 minutes for your opening remark. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, and thank you for letting me speak to the committee. My name is Pat Boudreau. I started my career as a correctional officer in 1977. I retired on January 30th, 2015, after 37 and a half years of service. My career was good, but not without challenges. At times, my job was life-threatening. I'm happy to say I reached retirement without a drug or alcohol problem and my sense of humor intact. On April 1st, the year I retired, I was shocked to find out that my wife was having an ongoing affair and left me. I met my now common-law wife, Kelly, in July of 2015. She was a widow who had lost her husband in September of 2014. During our time together, I was required to support my ex-spouse as she was not working at the time of our separation. We are now divorced, so she will not be entitled to a survivor pension. However, had we not divorced, the woman who betrayed me would be entitled to a survivor benefit. Something very wrong about the changing world we live in. The pension clauses have not kept current with the family changes that do happen. I did not create this situation. I contacted my pension provider to ask if Kelly could be added as a survivor to my pension. I was told that I could contribute to the plan if I wanted Kelly to receive a benefit. It is not affordable for us at this time. After 37 years of paying into a pension, I was hurt, upset, and angry that the woman that would be there during my senior years would not be cared for if I die. It's wrong that if I survive Kelly, she leaves me with an OMERS survivor pension and a home that she fought so hard to keep. If she survives me, I leave her nothing from my pension after 37 and a half years because they think she's a gold digger. It's not just the case. We have supported each other through difficult times, both emotionally and financially. We are still trying to find a solution to the financial shortfall if Kelly survives me. Kelly will be forced to face the loss of a second husband and have to sell the home she worked so hard to hold on to when her first husband passed. It's just not fair. Everyone deserves to wake up to someone that they love. We were lucky to both have a second chance. I'm devastated that I financially cannot care for Kelly beyond our time together. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Boudreau. And now I would like to invite Mrs. Kelly Van Cocknet for 5 minutes, please.
Oops. Attached here. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Van Cocknet. Pat and I are happy to have the opportunity to speak today.
You have to turn on your mic. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Van Cocknet. Pat and I are happy to have the opportunity to speak today. I'm a retired school custodian. I made the choice to retire in September of last year. Planning for retirement and choosing the right time is a difficult task. There are the considerations of the physical demands of my job that were taking their toll on my aging body, and there were the huge concerns of financial insecurity and hardship should I live a long life. And there was the real fear of not having any quality time with Pat, who is 8 years my senior. I'm a widow, as Pat has mentioned. My husband died the day before my 50th birthday. It was a painful time that changed how I would think forever. It was a pivotal moment in my life that made me very aware that time is our most precious commodity. Like most Canadian families, we were working hard, we were not taking time to enjoy vacations, we were trying to pay off our home and get set for retirement. Cancer cheated Ken and I of those retirement years. This was my reasoning behind retiring a little early, taking a much lower pension and having time with Pat. No matter what that retirement looked like, it was the right decision. The only problem was a shortfall in my income and finding out that Pat would not have a survivor benefit for me should I survive him. For Pat and I, it was illogical to think that after 37 and a half years of work, that the woman that he loves, who has been working since she was 16, who offered him a new shared home after he lost his to a divorce, would be called a gold digger. It's ironic that me being the gold digger will leave Pat a mortgage-free home that he can afford to stay in and an OMERS survivor pension that he won't even need to live a comfortable life. Pat's pension plan, as written, doesn't make sense or keep pace with today's definition of working families. If I survive Pat, I will have to immediately sell our home that I love and work so hard to keep after Ken's passing. I'm not sure at this point where I actually will go. I do not have children to offer any kind of support. Pat and I are very happy to have found each other in our later years. Not everyone gets that chance in their late 50s and early 60s. For that, we feel blessed. Things have been tough financially. I have paid off the mortgage, and Pat has paid his financial agreements of his separation and divorce. We are not in any position to pay for a survivor benefit. The sole purpose of retirement planning is to try to have some security if you should live a long time while still enjoying some fruits of your labor. I'm not sure how many couples are affected by the ancient paragraphs of the pension plan. My guess would be a small handful, but they will pay dearly. The definition of family has changed many times over. Both parties work and contribute to household income, and few have the luxury to live off one income. Those of us who are affected are going to have hardship that no amount of retirement planning could prevent. At the end of the day, we are forced to roll the dice when it comes to retirement planning. The facts still remain that Pat and I paid the price in many ways in his career and he paid for a long time into a pension plan that will not support his surviving spouse. It's unfair, but we made the decision to choose time over money. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard, and we pray for changes for those who are affected.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Venkodnet. And right now, I'd like to invite Mrs. Tracy Lee Evanchin for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Lee Evanchin, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I had the pleasure of speaking before this committee before and recognize some familiar faces. Hello. And to the new faces, it's a pleasure to meet you. Last time I gave a brief outline of what a weekend looks like for us when my children are visiting and the minefields we must navigate to do so. I will not go through that again, but will give you some other insights into our lives. Having met Kevin at a program for veterans and active military members suffering for PTSD, I knew that there would be some hurdles in our lives. I truly didn't know that there would be this many. I ask myself sometimes, what did I get myself into? Honestly, that thought lasts less than a heartbeat. This man has given me and my children everything he possibly can. Being his wife is amazing, frustrating, angering, and full of love, and I would not want anything else. Would I like to see it be different? Absolutely, but we are dealing with the crappy hand we have been dealt, a hand we did not ask for nor deserve. He willingly joined the military to fight for his country and to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And he did that not once, but twice. Twice. He gave of himself only to have the country he fought for turn their back on him, give him grief, and make things so difficult that he had often thought of ending it. Why? Because the government decided to. They would say, oh, we are looking into those claims. Let's create a study and spend millions on it. How about giving the millions to the veterans' spouses and their families? This ridiculous clause was written in 1901. Are you serious? And twice, Prime Minister Trudeau said, get rid of it, and yet it's still here. The majority of veterans and or spouses are living just above the poverty level, if not below it. Why? We're not asking for much, just what we deserve and were promised. We don't want to struggle with what do we pay the phone bill or the mortgage this month? Do we eat hot dogs or peanut butter sandwiches? You may think I'm joking, but this is a serious dilemma for some veterans. And at the end of the veterans' days, when he or she gave it all for his or her country, his or her spouse will be destitute because they are not entitled to his or her benefits because they found love after the age of 60. I ask you, if any of you are over 60 and have a significant other, how would you feel if you wouldn't be able to care for them after you're gone? I can tell you, my husband has cried over the fact that he is unable to financially provide for me once he's gone. He feels less than a man, useless, less than dirt, and worthless. How dare this government make him and others feel that way? For example, when Kevin turned 65, his take-home monies were cut by 20%. I guess life ends for a veteran at 65. When they need help the most, they get thrown out with the bathwater. He was unceremoniously released from the military because he was considered old. 60 is not old. We are on the phone daily to VAC, the Ombudsman Office, Human Rights, to try and get straightforward answers. Those answers are rarely given. We receive responses that go in circles. We are not uneducated people that feel that way each time we get such asinine responses, and yes, I said responses, as they are never answers to the questions. Responses that seem to change like the weatherman's predictions. We need things to be easier. Things are made harder, so much harder. Nobody seems to want to be accountable. Someone has to. Someone must initiate the change. Please be that someone. When I was his common law partner, we figured out that I was entitled to his VAC benefits, but not his military benefits. How does that make sense? We found out that if a veteran is not married by 60, any partnership after 60 will not be recognized. He never knew this clause existed. Once married, we had a year to submit the paperwork in order for me to be able to get his military pension, i.e. his benefits, i.e. pension, but we have to pay into it from what little monies we now have coming in. Veterans Affairs returns upwards of $150 million a year to the government. This money could be used to support veterans and their families, no matter what the family unit looks like. Please know that I am new to this life and I would not change it. Veterans have to chase people for help, but it isn't help, it's more trouble. They give up. They are tired of being marginalized, cast aside, and forgotten. And as his wife, if he wants to ensure that I have some of his pension, we must pay back into a pension he is already paying back into because he re-enlisted to go to Afghanistan at the age of 53. If we do that, we will have next to nothing to live on. Let that sink in, please. Please help us. Help change this archaic clause and help veterans and their families with the help they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Evanshin, for your opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for letting me talk to you. After that, there really isn't much to say. I can give you a history of the situations of this clause and who I am. I have served the Canadian Forces on 2 different times, enlisting in the early 80s, released in 87, which then I proceeded to become a paramedic in Ontario for 22 years. Afghanistan came along, and I felt it was a situation that I could take my skills and my knowledge to the forefront, which then had me join the military at that time. Served until 60. At that age, I was released. A couple reasons. PTSD. Basically, I was broken. And there is also the clause that at 60, the military releases you. It's an age category. Since then, fighting PTSD, fighting other injuries, Veterans Affairs have helped, but not totally. And then we came along and I met this young lady. We lived in a common law situation for a number of years. We were planning on marriage and COVID came along. That deferred us. So finally, when we got married in October last year, we are now considered married. Under Veterans Affairs, she already was beneficiary to all of what I can give her from Veterans Affairs, but the superannuation clause of the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act and this gold digger clause restricted her dramatically and totally from receiving my pension if I passed away. When I found out this, it was like a kick in the gut. It just totally deflated me from the ability to give her what I planned on giving her and not feeling a total human and total man. So it's contradictory. Common law is recognized by the government in most things. The taxman recognizes it, VAC recognizes, the military recognizes it till the age of 60. And then all of a sudden, the military doesn't. It's kind of interesting. Our previous prime minister, by the name of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, said that the government should stay out of the bedrooms of Canada. This to me is we're still in the bedrooms of Canada when we're telling you can be or cannot receive things because of your marital status. As you all know, the gold digger clause started 1901 because of the Civil War in the United States. We jumped on the bandwagon and felt that there'd be individuals following through with this. But the U.S. military have gotten rid of this clause, and we're still playing with it even more than ever 10 years later. There is also the situation that the Canadian Forces do not inform members that this clause exists, so when they do get out, they are surprised to this situation. It's not appropriate, and it's actually a poor way of treating veterans and soldiers at the same time. So basically with that, you got most of it from Tracy. I totally agree with what she said, and I can't really say much more on that. If you have any questions, which you will probably have during the question time, I'm more than willing to answer your questions. Thank you for letting me spend time with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sewell. And we're going to ask you some questions. And I'd like to invite de la Coalition des Équités des Pensions.
From the Surviving Spouses Pension Fairness Coalition, Maurice Gill, co-chair. Mr. Gill, turn on your microphone. You have the floor. Hello, you can hear me? Yes, excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We've submitted a brief in which we've tried to give an overview of the issue being studied. I'd like to present additional information now and a few comments. I wasn't able to send you my notes earlier. I only finished yesterday. So, about our coalition. It was organized in 2013-2014 when we recruited many partners who wanted to support our goal, which is to contribute to changing federal laws for pensions. Excuse me, the image is unstable for me. So these partners are retiree associations, including the Canadian Association of Retirees from the Military, as well as the National Association of Federal Retirees, which presented to you on April 29th. Unions and other organizations, you can find the list on our website. The coalition became visible through our speaking events in 2015. In 2016, we began to raise awareness. Excuse me, I'm distracted by something. With a number of ministers directly or indirectly responsible for different laws affecting pensions. In 2018, we supported a bill from the NDP that would amend these laws, and we publicized the petition supporting it. After a long pandemic that has changed politics in this country and considerably reduced our action opportunities, here we are before your committee. Now back to the brief. On federal legislation, I talked about the 1901 Act. There's another exclusion I want to mention today. A widow who remarried, perhaps to have access to more wealth, lost her pension, and if her new spouse died, the pension was reestablished. A similar clause is in a number of retirement plans. For a long time, for Canada's pension plan, 1965 to 1987. We think the after 60 clause is totally arbitrary, and we understand full well that many people find it discriminatory. A Supreme Court decision rejected a complaint in 1994. But reality changes over time. The court's opinion could change. We saw it in the matter of assisted suicide and medical aid in dying. In our brief, we mentioned a certain rationale that could justify the after retirement clause. Marriages after 60 often happen after retirement, so you could eliminate the after 60 and there could be just one clause for all legislation. Why not? Now, the Survivors Fund, the Veteran Survivors Fund, there was research, and I mentioned the results in the brief. So, over 4,000 widows were surveyed in 2020. If between 2005 and 2020, we take into account that during that 15-year period, 2005 to 2020, there were other widows without a pension who unfortunately died. The total amount for that period would increase by hundreds of people if we could take into account widows who have passed away. And also of interest, there's data from this research. 19% of these widows, Mr. Gill, excuse me. So, low income. Mr. Gill, excuse me, would you like to take a few seconds to wrap up? And then we will be asking you questions. Because it's 5 minutes for each opening remark. So 27% of them received the guaranteed income supplement. So I must conclude quickly, unfortunately. And so the conclusion from our brief, 0 pensions is totally unfair and unacceptable. 20 or 30% is a lot better than 0. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Now we will go to the first round of questions. I would invite members to say who their question is for, because we have Mr. Boudreau, Ms. Van Cougnet, Ms. Evanshin, Corporal Sewell, and Mr. Gill. And I would also say to the witnesses, if the question is for you, I don't have to tell you, you can just go ahead and answer immediately. So we will begin with Frank Caputo, the first vice chair of the committee, for the next 6 minutes. And by the way, I'd also like to say hi to one of our colleagues participating, Samir Zubeidi. So go ahead, Mr. Caputo, the next 6 minutes are yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's obviously a pleasure and an honor to be here with everybody on the committee. I want to thank everybody here for their service, and those who may not have served in an official government or military role. I want to thank the service of their partners for the support. I know that I am nothing without the support of my wife and partner, so I thank you for that. I must say that this issue has really resonated a lot with me since it came to the forefront a few months ago for me, maybe a couple of months after my election. And at that time, it was generally something I thought was fairly confined to the military. But Mr. Boudreau, you said something that struck me right from the get-go, obviously, because you probably don't know this, but my first career was in federal corrections as well. I only served for about 1/10 of how much time you served for, 37.5 years. That is an accomplishment in any career. But in the federal correctional system, especially in the institution where you worked, that's quite an accomplishment. And I thank you for your service for that. And I thank everybody for their service, Corporal Sewell, and to all the partners as well. Thank you so much for everything you do and for being here. All that being said, we've heard how this impacts you. Now, I'm wondering though, are there any hidden impacts? Now, I remember one of the I believe it was Ms. Evanishin talked about being labeled a gold digger and how offensive that was, and that is. Are there any hidden impacts here that people may not really have appreciated that you want to share? And that goes to all 4 of you. This is your time to tell us exactly how this has impacted you.
Maybe we're going to start with Mr. Boudreau.
I just think it's so unfair that Kelly and I have chose to fall in love, and we want to support each other, and it's just unfortunate that if I should pass before her, I can't leave her anything, and that is so demeaning. I understand the retired gentleman from the military, and I respect you and thank you for your service too. It's just not fair to label everybody a gold digger, because we aren't, or they aren't. It doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know, maybe Corporal Sewell would like to.
If any of the other 3 have anything they want to share, please feel free at this time.
I'll
Yes.
jump in.
Okay.
As Mr. Boudreau just said, we are being penalized for falling in love, getting a second chance after the age of 60. That is, there's just no words to explain how gut-wrenching that is for someone who was in one that it wasn't the best, and then to find someone who just is incredible to then have this happen. It's not fair, and it's not just. Thank you.
I'm wondering if Corporal Sewell, it looks like he's unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah, with this whole thing, it includes also people that have gone through their whole life in a common law situation. As we know nowadays, a lot of people basically stay away from the marriage as we know it, and they are more into a common law situation throughout their life. So you can have an individual in the Canadian Forces who is recognized as married by common law, go through his whole career, whatever number of years, to come to his retirement and his release, to be told that, oh, all those years you had, they don't mean an iota of anything post 60. He now then has to step up and get married. Most people don't want to get into that whole marriage thing. They feel that common law is more than what they want, and thus try to stay with that. So we're kind of saying, well, prior to 60, it was okay. Post 60, it's not okay. So that's what we kind of have to look at. It's in that sense, it's not a gold digger, because that person could have been married for 25, 30 years, or common law of 25, 30 years. And now suddenly they're kind of being labeled as a gold digger because of a clause that was written in 1901 based on information that does not really exist anymore. That's, thank you.
Thank you for that. This issue does strike for me. I had somebody who I thought about putting forward to the committee who is someone close to me who he and his spouse both married after 60. And he was not only a veteran, but also had served in a federal agency and had a federal pension as a result. So I think that this is much more widespread than we really realize. Somebody said, I wonder if this only impacts a handful of people. I think this impacts a few more people. It looks like my time is up with that one question. Thank you all for being here again and for your service.
Thank you so much, Mr. Caputo. Yes, your time is up. So I'd like to invite Mr. Wilson Miao for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, Wilson. Mr. Miao?
Chair,
Yes.
I believe Wilson is unavailable to pose question at this time. He is on, but I think he's having difficulty.
Yeah, would you like to?
We will move on to Richie.
Okay, so Ms. Richie Valdez, please go ahead for 6 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Chair, colleagues, and thank you to the witnesses for sharing your heartfelt testimonies, and a special thank you to those who have served our country. I'm going to direct some questions to you, Mr. Gill. So, Mr. Gill, you say that less than 1% of veterans take their pension with the 30 to 50% decrease. Can you explain how do they financially support themselves?
Je m'excuse, I didn't
Excuse me.
question correctly because you're speaking too low.
No problem. I'm going to repeat it again and then go ahead.
Excuse me, Ms. Valdez. I'd like to say je voudrais dire à Monsieur Gill.
I'd like to say to Mr. Gill that interpretation is available on his device, so he can choose to listen to the question in French. Do you know how? Yes, I'll take the interpretation in French, and she can repeat her question. Yes, okay, so I'll allow her that time. Ms. Valdez, please, the time has been stopped, so please start over with your question so Mr. Gill can hear it, please.
No problem. So, Mr. Gill, you say that less than 1% of veterans take their pension with the 30 to 50% decrease. Go ahead.
I'm not on the right interpretation. I'm sorry. Interpretation from English? So at the bottom of your screen, you click on the interpretation button and you choose French. Okay. Yes. Okay, start over, please. Okay, you've selected French? I think so. Okay, we'll do a test.
In English, do you have the translation?
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Just testing that translation is going through okay.
Monsieur Gill, vous avez la traduction.
Mr. Gill, are you hearing the interpretation?
I don't hear the interpretation.
OK. Bon, qu'est-ce que je...
Well, what I would propose, perhaps a technician can contact you, Mr. Gill. And if Ms. Valdez has another question for other witnesses, it would be ideal in order to continue right now. So, Mr. Gill, we'll get back to you later.
Merci.
Merci.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Ms. Valdez, go ahead, please.
Sure, no problem. So we'll just switch gears for a bit since the interpretation is still being worked out. So I'm just going to open it up to the floor. I've been listening to the stories that you've shared with your experience. And one of the things that I am trying to really understand is you've shared stories about how this has affected your life in many different ways. But can you elaborate on how this has affected the way that you've needed to make choices? So has it affected the way that you've needed to make decisions or make choices? If you can reflect on that, I'd appreciate it. And we can start with Mr. Boudreau, and we'll go through to the rest of the witnesses as well.
Well, it has just made us try and figure out why, if I stayed married to my wife who cheated on me, and I lived common law with Kelly for the next 20 years, when I pass, my ex-wife that cheated on me is entitled to my pension benefits. It just does not make sense. Kelly and I have chose to be together, and I wanted to put her on my pension as a survivor. And they tell me if I want to take some of my money that I'm living from check to check, and I want to pay 30, 40, or 50% of that, she will get a survivor benefit of a very minor amount. And I don't even know how much that is because we can't afford 50% of my pension is just ridiculous to try and make ends meet on. I hope that answers it.
It does, and I'll give Mrs. Vakunin an opportunity to also weigh in. I think I heard her also beside you.
Yeah, so I, as I mentioned in my statement, my choice is for retiring a little bit early just because Pat's, older than I am, and I don't want to lose time with him. But I wouldn't have qualified, I was fortunate enough to have my own pension, but I had to make a choice. And I was not entitled to my full pension to age 65. I'm 57. So I had to decide, do I want time and some quality time and maybe less options for things to do in retirement? You always hope that you can, like I said, have some of the fruits of your labor and be able to do some fun things in retirement. And we've had to now look at it and say, well, do we put a certain amount if we can put a little bit? Or do we just say, okay, well, the house, and then where do I go? Do I, I fund myself, my retirement with my home, which I'm fortunate and blessed to have. But when we look at today's rents and other accommodations, I can't afford to stay in the home and pay for the monthly on my retirement income. It's small. And I think the thing that's upsetting is, you think, I've been working since I was, 15, 16. I started working at Burger King, and I have done every job imaginable. I've worked hard. And every time I was without work or I got laid off, I found another job. And to be turned around and say, well, 60, you're old to find love. Well, wait till you're 50. 50's not old. Wait till you're 60. 60's not old. We have lots of fun and time and life ahead of us, we try to stay healthy. But the thing is that, to be labeled a gold digger and to be discriminated as, in my case, I feel very much discriminated against as a woman when you say I'm a gold digger. I've worked very hard. I feel my small OMERS pension. Like, are you seriously? They're going to give 65% of that to Pat. He won't need that. It's just ridiculous, the whole thing in my mind. We were shocked when we found out that there would be nothing in provision there for me. So it's been very difficult to make the decision to retire. But as I said, we chose time. After losing Ken young, he worked his whole life, never had a retirement. I wasn't going to sit back and say, I'm going to work till 65, and Pat's, in his late 70s, and we're going to do what, We want to enjoy some time, even if that's sitting in my backyard with my garden, that's what it is. But this whole thing has changed. And I think for him working 37 and a half years and paying into something that will go absolutely nowhere. And like he said, he could have just kept his ex-wife on there. She could have collected his pension. Are you serious? That's like, it's offensive. It's totally offensive and discriminatory, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you for providing such detail. I appreciate you sharing all your personal stories. I'll give an opportunity also to Mrs. Evanshin.
Hi there. For me, I'm not in the same boat as Pat and Kelly. I don't have a pension. I was married for 30 years, and for half of that, before I had my children, I worked, and then I stayed home and raised 4 children. And, with the grace of whatever you want to call it, I found Kevin. And with that, we're struggling to figure out what we're going to do next. If I pass before him or he passes before me, there's 16 years between us. And I'm just turned 52. We need to enjoy life. He's had a lot of medical issues that we never know if it's going to rear its ugly head again. We don't want to deal with it anymore. And it is extremely offensive, like Kelly said, that they consider me a gold digger. They don't live in our shoes. They don't know our lives. I wish they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Evanshin. And to you, Mr. Sewell.
Excuse me,
go
Mrs.
ahead.
Valdez, the time is over, so we're going to come back in another round. So maintenant, j'aimerais...
Now, I'd like to invite the second vice chair of the committee, Mr. Luc Desilets, and in the meantime, I'll let you know that the technicians are working with Mr. Gill. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Desilets, for 6 minutes. Hello to my colleagues. Hello to our guests. Welcome. So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Gill is not currently able to answer, even if the questions are in French? Well, good question. I'd like to see with the clerk, but I know Mr. Gill, we can see that he's testing. Mr. Gill, can you hear us? Turn on your microphone, please, Mr. Gill. Your microphone. Yes, okay. Okay. So there may be questions in French directly, so you'll be able to answer. So, Luc Desilets, you may ask your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Mr. Gill. I have questions for you. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Great. First, repealing the clause for after 60, that's on the Liberal platform. It has been since 2015, as you know. The Veterans Survivors Fund has existed since 2019. I can't figure out why the government still hasn't published or ordered a study, an actuarial study, to determine the cost of such a measure. For the marriage after 60 clause. Does that make sense to you? Do you have anything to say about that? That after Well, 7 years later, we still don't know how much that change would cost. Thank you for the question. Can you hear me? Everyone can hear me? Yes, very well. They've made some calculations. They've used the wrong numbers according to an actuary, a professional actuary who advised us. The government does not want to change it. It's a mission impossible that was given to Veterans Affairs and to National Defense. That's why we propose to look at the problem from a completely new approach. It's possible to give a proportional pension, a reduced pension in these cases. I'm talking about after retirement, because the rationale after retirement, well, there isn't any for 60. That's purely arbitrary and quasi-discriminatory. So we would propose a totally new approach. It's new ground. I don't have any numbers to provide. I don't want to provide examples. The pension would increase with the years of the relationship of common life. So if we look at the annex to our brief, a certain woman spent 30 years with a man. She was his caregiver for many years. So she could obtain up to 50%, but for less than 50%, it would be based on how long the spouse spent with the retiree. In Nova Scotia, there was a very specific case. 2 ex-spouses were both eligible to the pension, so they separated the pension and prorated it for years of common life. And an anecdote here. There was the ex-spouse and the current spouse knew each other, and the retiree passed away after 5 years of disability, and so the current spouse was the caregiver. So what happened is the ex-spouse, who had benefited from the pension, shared it with the current spouse, part of the pension, on a regular basis. And that shows the injustice of the current system. There you go. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for sharing it with us and for your involvement on this. It's really not easy. It's not black or white. It's not clear. You said something. You said it was like a mission impossible. Why do you see it that way? Well, in the government's mind, it seems like it's hard to understand. This was put in the mandate of the Veterans Affairs Minister, even though it's not his responsibility. It's the Minister of Defense who has authority over the Retirement Act. There are experts in national defense who've worked on this. I'm trying to communicate with them to know what they've done, and I want to pitch my idea that we've put forward, which would be to make it proportional to the common life together. A reasonable pension for a little bit more equity. So, zero pension makes no sense, but another government than the Liberal government would probably be in the same position. People are scared to touch this. There's one government in the country that's done differently since 1995. It's in Quebec with the Public Service Act. The pension goes to all survivors at the time of death, regardless of when they started being in love. Thank you, Mr. Gill. I think we're a leader in Quebec on that. We could talk about it later with the ERECOP system, which doesn't penalize women because the people who are most affected here are women. We know that this affects 95%. The 95% of the people affected by this are women, and these are women who experience financial instability. So I see the chair with his popsicle stick. I will stop there, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Inaudible. You can say désolé.
Oh, bon Dieu, merci.
Oh, okay. Well, I was on mute. So there we go. Thank you, Mr. Gill. And now we will go to Rachel Blaney for the next 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I want to thank everyone who's here, especially those of you who are having to share incredibly personal stories. And let me just apologize that you have to face this reality, and the only way for us to address it is for you to come on a screen and tell people your really personal stories. And I think that is a travesty, and why I'm fighting so hard, and of course why I put forward Bill C-221 that will address this issue, an NDP bill that's been in the House repeatedly, and hopefully we see some action on it finally. So if I could come to you first, Pat, and then I'm going to come to you right after, Kevin. I just want to know, when did you find out that if you married or entered a common law marriage after 60, that you would not be able to have a survivor's pension for the woman you loved?
I found that out after I called my pension provider. I wanted to put Kelly on, and that's when they told me I can't. They just said no. And another thing I want to bring up here is that with my ex-wife, I ended up having to pay her an awful lot of money to protect my pension that I worked so hard for and that I paid into, and I deserve it. And as a result of that, I wanted to share my pension with Kelly should I pass before her. And that's when the pension people told me, no, you can't do it. However, if you want to pay 30, 40, or 50% of your pensionable income, she's entitled to something. And they never did tell me how much, but 50% of my pension, that just wasn't, it's still not feasible today.
Yeah, exactly. Kevin.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, when did you find out that if you were in a relationship after 60, that you would not be able to leave a survivor's benefit?
Basically, like the other gentleman, when Tracy came into my life, we were looking at what she would be able to, if she would get any of the benefits from my military service, my Veterans Affairs. The only one that came up and basically said no was the Superannuation Act, and everything else she's good for and good to go with. But like Pat said, you have to buy it back, and if you're making, well, my pension actually is $960 a month for my pension. I am buying back my previous pension, so you do the simple math. If I am going to suddenly pay 30% more to cover Tracy or not, it's financially impossible.
Well, thank you for that. And I think that's really important because, of course, like you both mentioned, the operational survivor benefit, the OSB, is what you can pay 30 to 50% of your income into, your pension income. So I'm just wondering, I know that you've both chosen not to do that, obviously, because it would mean economic inability to do anything today. And what a horrible place to be in. I just can't imagine how painful it is to make these kind of decisions. So I guess my next question is, when were you told that if you did take that option, or were you told that if you took that option to take 30 to 50% of your pension and put it away for them, that if your loved one, your partner, passed before you did, you would never receive a penny back? If I could start with you again, Pat.
I was never told that. That was just something I learned recently. So the pension people never, ever told me that if I paid in for 2 years, 3 years, 6 months. They never told me what Kelly would get, and they never told me if I would get that money back if she passed before me. They never told me that.
That's really helpful. Kevin, do you know?
Basically, at the initial start, when I asked to, I was told this. I've inquired a number of times about it and keep getting the same answer that happens. But that seems to be an ongoing situation with the Canadian Forces superannuation. They don't tell anybody anything. It's kind of, you have to do a lot of digging to find this stuff out. And the problem with the Canadian Forces is most individuals are told all through their career to, if they ask a question, they're told they don't need to know. Most of them are go through their career totally not asking questions because it's not their need to know. So when they get to the point of retirement, they still don't ask questions. They're not also informed. When members get out of the Canadian Forces, there's supposed to be sessions to bring them up on knowledge and that. And this is one issue that has never been brought up in any of the sessions at that time for the members because they don't think of these things. And so that's how it ends up.
Yes, and I know for myself, it wouldn't occur to me to ask those questions. I would just assume that when I got married or when I was in a long-term relationship, my loved one would receive something when I was gone.
Well, also it goes back to the fact that all through their career, common law relation is recognized by the military, and all of a sudden at 60 it's not recognized.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, I think that's my time, but I will be coming back for you, Tracy and Kelly, in the next round. You're on mute, Chair.
Sorry, I don't know what's happening today. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'd like to invite Mr. Fraser Tolmie for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead, Mr. Tolmie.
Chair, I think that's a little bit of payback for last week.
Please go ahead, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to thank you for your service, Corporal Sewell, and point out, Mr. Boudreau, that my father was in the correctional facilities before, and so I understand that it's not an easy job, what you witness, and appreciate you being open with some of the challenges that you're facing today. Right now, I'd like to kind of just point out, a comment that was made by Mr. Sewell about, every other legislation that we have concerning common law and the way that we look at partnership seems to be linear everywhere else except for in this particular circumstance, and we seem to be outdated, and that is validated by the language that's even used when we talk about gold digger, which quite honestly maybe in 1901 was acceptable back then, but terminology used right now here is not acceptable. So I apologize that you're labeled that. Quite honestly, and I'm sorry because that, as I said, seems outdated. Mr. Gill, you're not going to get off the hook that easy. So apart from my statements, I do have a question for you, sir. That this issue was ruled on by the courts. But that was nearly 30 years ago. So 30 years have passed since that ruling. Are you aware of any new moves to challenge this in the courts again, sir? I'll get you to unmute, Mr. Gill. Mr. Gill, I'll get you to unmute. There we go.
Well, I got the question. It's okay, no problem. No, I have no idea. I mean, I don't have any confidence in the Supreme Court. But as I mentioned in the brief, they may change they change their opinions when the time evolves. I mean, the society is changing and so on. But in that case, I don't understand how they could say that an interpretation of the charter, and that's why they rejected the request. But anyway, I think, as I said, I just suggest to forget about this, the 68. It is irrelevant. I mean, the real problem with the older, let's say, older people pension is that after the retirement, we have another era. The pensioner no longer contributes, and we can rationalize to say that there could be two systems. One before the retirement, for marriage before the retirement, and marriage after retirement. It would be more logical, I think, because I like to work in logically, and so it could be done. I'm just losing the other part here anyway. So, but this, I mean, it could be strange. I mean, to see that the government decide to standardize the exclusion condition across all the legislation, rejecting the 60 after 60, and keeping only the other one, and because it could make sense. And I think that I just would add another thing. I would think that looking into the future very far ahead,
sorry to step in on this.
Pension, survivor pension could be applied also to before retirement marriage. It makes sense in a way. So
okay, thank you, Mr. Gill. I appreciate that. And then Mr. Sewell, you wanted to step in there, sir. Just
yeah, if you don't mind, the Public Service Union has looked at was the originators that took this to the Supreme Court back in the 90s. It costs them a lot of money. They don't want to go back to the courts on it at monies because of that situation. The RCMP are looking at going after it. Retirees Association are looking at it also. So those are two other things. We've already contacted Human Rights on this. On age discrimination and marital status discrimination. They can't touch it because both of the act of the Militia Act and the is outside of their jurisdiction, and also you have to look at the other ones. They are not able to touch them because they're the age factor on it, not on age factor on the individual, but age factor on the act itself.
Okay, thank you,
Corporal.
Thank you for both your answers, and Chair, I just want to make sure we're still in a good working relationship.
Yes, no. We are still on a good relationship, but you know that I have to manage with the time, so all of us would like to intervene. So thank you, Mr. Tolmi. And right now, I'd like to invite Mr. Charles Rogers for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Rogers, Charles. My mic is open, but Mr. Charles Rogers, is he here? 1, 2. Mr. Sanson, would you like to intervene?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, you read my mind.
Okay, please go ahead.
I was just going to say that I will take his turn and he'll take mine right behind. So, perfect. Listen, I want to begin by thanking all of you for your presentation and your service, and those who the families serve as well. We've learned that more and more. It's the important and the role of families and the spouses and kids. I want to thank you as well for sharing your personal stories, but there's a lot of interesting facts coming out today that is a little different than last time, and I find that this will be very helpful. I don't know where to start. I get too many ideas, but let's start with Monsieur Gill. Monsieur Gill, si j'ai bien compris.
If I've understood correctly, and I like your idea of looking at different ways of reaching some goals that would meet the challenge that seems to be mission impossible. I don't like that, but I accept your description. Can you explain, if I've understood correctly, you've said that the idea you're proposing is that based on the number of years of the marriage after 60, there could be a percentage of the pension, perhaps not a full pension, so the 30-year-old, well, 50%, depending on the type of pension, could be the maximum percentage. So if it's 15 years, maybe 25%. So you have that in your brief. Have you shared that calculation before? And I find it an intriguing idea. Could you elaborate on it, please? Yes, that's it. I didn't want to get into technical details, but you could think that each year of common life would be a percentage that accumulates, and there would be a maximum. Well, the normal pension is 50% of the retirees, and there could be the progression in different ways. You could start with a bigger percentage and then go down to try to give something. The first 5 years could be 3%, and then 15% at 5 years, and so on. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Thank you. We don't need to go through all of the details, but it gives you an example. It's a type of thing that should be studied. Has that been shared at other levels, that idea, to date? Or is this the first time you talk about it? Well, it's been shared very little to date. We thought of this innovation, this new idea, for this appearance, and starting tomorrow, thank you, Mr. Gill, we can prepare a plan for other goals to really spread this idea. If it's rejected, well then it'll be back to Mission Impossible, but it's not. Thank you, Mr. Gill. I know you've said that Quebec doesn't make a distinction. Mr. Desilets was very pleased to hear that. So you've surely said what he wanted to hear. Do you think that part of the problem where governments, not necessarily the government in place today, governments in the past, because this is since 1901, is the question, does it have to do with the formula for the pension? So it's always analyzed, if I've understood correctly. I'm not an expert, but a certain percentage of people will pass away earlier than others. Others will live to 100. And so that's how it's formulated. Do you think the issue is that if we introduce a new program, it could increase the percentage of payments for pensions? Do you think that's the issue? I'd like to have your opinion. Okay. I'm not sure I've understood correctly. Are you talking about what it would cost, finally, to expand pensions? Yes. So that's a secret for actuaries. They make predictions. These are scientists. They take into account demographics and etc. But I think they could conduct a study on this and define limits so there could be a minimum and a maximum that could be done, and it's different from the normal pension. Thank you very much. My time is up, but I have to say I have like 6 questions I'd still like to ask Mr. Chair. Well, we'll get back to you. The point I want to make is that the information provided by our witnesses is so good that it leads to interesting questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have Mr. Rogers, who has his hand raised, to say something. Go ahead, please, Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to check to see if you could hear me now.
Very good. I can hear you. Yes.
Oh, okay.
But
thank you
next
very much.
Next time it's
Yeah.
going to be your turn. All right. Okay. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Alors là, mesdames, messieurs, nous allons passer à 2 courtes interventions.
Now, 2 short rounds of 2.5 minutes. I would invite Luc Desilets to turn on his microphone. Go ahead, Mr. Desilets. All right. Mr. Sanson took the words from my mouth. I don't know if he was being careful or not, but in Quebec, we have a system, the RECOP. I contributed to it as a school principal. And so if I were married, my spouse wouldn't be in trouble, neither would I. So in your opinion, Mr. Gill, why can Quebec have this sort of system, and why can't we have this with Veterans Affairs, briefly if possible? In my brief, I asked the question, the Department of National Defense, has it consulted Quebec's system, Quebec's pension system, to understand how they manage? And the other example I gave, it's really an exceptional case. Canadian or Ontario's municipalities decided to do it this way. It's totally possible. Would it have such a big impact on employer contributions, employee contributions? Because you'd have to talk to unions. So there could be a positive approach to this. In your opinion, does the employee in Quebec pay more than the employee for national defense? I have no idea, because it varies. There are so many factors at play. The age of the population, even the sex, or the gender, as you say now. I understand. We'd have to do more research. Okay. Well, the committee is here to make recommendations. After our meetings, yes, Mr. Popsicle. So, would I be correct in saying that you strongly suggest that the Canadian Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs should sit down to dialogue, collaborate, share information, because this issue really belongs to the armed forces? They have the fund and they manage it. Is that correct? That would be a recommendation. Yes, I think so. I mentioned myself earlier. I've already begun, but I want to continue and ask the Department of National Defense what they've done, what they could do, and suggest a new approach for them. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Thank you. Now, on to Rachel Blaney.
Yes, Capral, I'm sorry, but maybe that one of our members will ask you questions, so you will be able to intervene on that, you know?
Well, it's referenced this one. The United States military went through this approximately 10 years ago and corrected the situation.
But excuse me, Mr. Sewell, I have to ask members of the committee to ask you questions. So maybe one of them will ask you questions, so you will be able to. Okay, right. Please. So now for 2.5 minutes, I'd like to invite Ms. Blaney for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair. And And I'm going to have to go to Tracy and Kelly. Kevin, I'm not trying to be rude, but I want to make sure their voices are heard on this. Keep you out of trouble later on. But I guess I, first of all, just want to say that I am really appalled that it is called the Gold Diggers Clause. And it's very apparent to me after listening to many witnesses, sort of the visceral reaction that families have to being called a gold digger. And I think that's something that I hope all of us in this place take some reflection on. So, one of the things that I heard from both of you is the commitment of your family, how families are changing, and this definition definitely has to change. And I just want to remind all of us that the clause is in all of these departments. So we can't say one department can fix it. It's bigger than that. It's in every one of these departments. So I'm just wondering if both of you could take an opportunity, starting off with you, Kelly, and finishing with you, Tracy. What would be your experience if this clause was fixed? What would be the impact on your life?
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to say that I agree. I think if you put it back to each individual department, I think my fear would be that it would just keep going in a big circle. And the thing that exists between all of those, for veterans and Pat and I, is the fact that the clause is there. It's age. You're making a discrimination about age and the whole gold digger. So how it would affect me is that, I do worry. I do worry because I do not have children. I do worry that, when I'm older, will I be able to, look after myself? Like, where will I be after so many years of working? What situation will I be in? And when I hear of the story of Kevin and Tracy too, it hurts me to hear that kind of thing. That people that gave for the country, people that have been working their whole lives, are finding it difficult. They're finding it difficult to make ends meet. It shouldn't be the case. These people gave up a lot. Pat, Kevin, you've given a lot, and it's a big thing to step up and do that as a career, and to be feel treated
Kelly,
that way.
Yeah. Sorry, Kelly. I just got to give Tracy a few seconds too. I apologize.
Unfortunately, for me, if Kevin was to pass away tomorrow, if we go with what Mr. Gill is even suggesting, I'll get next to nothing because we've only been together so short a time. We can't, you're again punishing us for falling in love after the age of 60. And if something, God forbid, was to happen to him, I honestly don't know what I would do. Period. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Merci, Madame Blaney.
Thank you, Ms. Blaney.
Mr. Sewell, I know that we're going to have two other interventions, but I know that one of the members will ask you questions, so you will be able to intervene. So for now, I'd like to invite for 5 minutes, Ms. Anna Roberts. Mrs. Anna Roberts, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to something. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. It's tough to keep repeating these stories, and to be honest with you, it shouldn't really be necessary because this is a common sense issue. I don't know where we lost common sense. So I want to go back to Kelly when you said, you were 58, you're young. Well, the new 50 is, what is it, the new 40 now? So you're not old at all. So just want to make that clear. I guess my question is, this issue seems to be going on for a long time. And I have to agree with my colleagues that it's about time we put it to bed. So how can we expedite this, in your opinion, expedite this situation so that the government understands enough is enough? We need to make changes. We can't wait for another research study. We can't wait another month. We can't wait another day. What can we do, or taking your opinion into account, what can we do to expedite this situation?
Well, in my opinion, you have to immediately drop the 60 clause and the retirement clause. Some people choose to have long careers. Some people, their careers are shortened. 60 is not old. It's discriminatory. It's just absolutely discriminatory. Like, why does it exist in Pat's pension plan, not in my pension plan? Like, Omer's, I think, is one of the few pension plans that chose to to make all the changes so they fit the definition of today's family. And you're right, there's no time. Like, I'm sitting here today thinking this is all wonderful, but if it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't help anybody. But we're here hoping that that change happens. It may not, the sad part is, it may not happen for the families that need it now. You know, it has to be changed that the law becomes, you know, dropping that discriminatory factor. Take it out, it fixes it.
So I will agree with you, because I lost my husband 27 years ago, and in my pension through my company, my new spouse will receive it. So it's something that I guess is strange to me when I'm hearing this. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'd like to maybe get the input. I know, is it corporal, Kevin? Sorry. Is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, maybe I should get new glasses. Corporate Sewell, I'm sorry about that. You wanted to say something earlier, and I wanted to give you that opportunity before I go to my next witness.
Thank you. In my research, I contacted the U.S. military about their clause, a gold digger clause in their pensions. They went through their whole pension thing approximately 10 years ago and reviewed it totally, and communicating with one of their senior majors who dealt with this at the time, who is a special advisor to the Secretary of the Army. He was shocked that we still have it in place here. He says, it sounds like we need to step up like they did 10 years ago and reevaluate and redo our pension system. That's it, basic.
Thank you for clearing that up for us. So I'd like to go to, is it Tracy? Sorry, can I call you Tracy? So you've been in a relationship now for many years, and I heard earlier that you had 4 children. What challenges do you think that have to be addressed immediately in order to ensure that moving forward in the future, you have the ability to continue supporting your children?
So I was in a relationship for 30 years before Kevin. Kevin and I have been together for 4. And I've had to go back to work in order to ensure that we have some money that I can ensure that I take care of my children, that my children have what they need before I look at myself and what we need. So I'm taking care of my kids before I'm taking care of Kevin and I. And what I make is not much. So nothing from nothing is a whole lot of nothing. And so there's a lot of sleepless nights. I'm not going to lie, a lot of tears. And some days I just don't know how we're going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So I'd like to go back to Mr. Bordeaux. Did I print Boudreau? Boudreau. English Boudreau. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. So you must have been very disappointed when you were informed that you can't pass on your pension to your spouse. Would you say that there is a lack of, when you joined your company, obviously someone didn't sit down with you and go over your HR benefits? Would I assume that that's correct?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Would you agree that maybe what we also should be looking at is that they take the time to go over detailed benefits to all individuals?
Thank you.
You know, I don't know if when I was 20 years old, I would have heard that. If they would have told me, if you retire after 37 and a half years and you've protected your pension because you've paid off your spouse, and if you meet somebody after you retire, oh, guess what? They're not entitled to your pension. I don't think I would have heard those words.
Am I done, Mr. Matt?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to have to buy you a new watch.
You're doing the same thing where like Mr. told me. So that's okay. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Charles Rogers. Now open your mic, Mr. Rogers, and it's time for you to ask questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm hoping this time you can hear me. Sorry to the witnesses, technical difficulties, of course. I want to come back to you, Kevin, on the a comment you made about the U.S. system and how the gold diggers clause has been canceled. And ask you how much you know about that particular situation in the U.S. because it intrigued me. And what was the result for the veterans there? What does it mean for them in terms of, I guess, survivor benefits for their spouses or their future benefits going forward? Can you enlighten us a little bit as a committee?
Certainly. Basically, what I did, I was reached out to this gentleman. He used to teach at West Point, and like I said, he's a special advisor to the Secretary of the Army, and we chatted about it. We didn't really get much into the mechanics of how it changed that, but they basically have removed the clause from their pension system. So he's more than willing to be a witness for this committee and give his advice to us or to you. So it's something maybe the committee wants to look at in the future.
Thank you, Kevin. And certainly, Mr. Chair, that might be something that we could look at as a committee. I would certainly be very intrigued and very interested in hearing what's happening in the U.S. because we've heard some reference to it before from some of the other witnesses. I know we had other witnesses, for example, that talked about giving the option to pay into a survivor benefits plan. And then, of course, if the veteran had died before the spouse would get absolutely nothing. That was my understanding. So I'm going to ask Kelly, is that how you understand it?
Oh, sorry, am I on? Yes, I am. That's how I understand it, yes. Yeah.
So it makes no sense, absolutely, that somebody would pay into a plan with no guarantee of some kind of at least getting a lump sum rebate if that were the case. So I just wanted to confirm that, as I heard from other witnesses.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So when I look at the circumstances of some of the other witnesses and talked about the monthly contribution that was required, that would make it extremely financially challenging, as you detailed. So that's not possible for you, Tracy, as well?
That's correct. There's some months that we're living off of my credit card or my line of credit.
Okay, so obviously that is not an option for you or for many others. And so therefore, the only solution seems to be that we go down the road that Kevin alluded to in terms of what the U.S. is doing or something like that kind of a solution. Tracy, just wondering if you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I think we've already kind of said it already. It's just, unfortunately, we just, in general, we're going around in circles about the same thing. We give back money not we as in individuals, but the government gives back, Veterans Affairs gives back hundreds of millions of dollars, but the answer is let's do another study and spend more millions of dollars to do a study. Just please provide the money to the veterans and their families that they need. We're not asking for millions. We're just asking to be able to live comfortably.
Yeah, so I wanted to re-ask the questions because I've been new to this committee for this term and just wanted to make sure that we're hearing the same answers from the people and their living experiences that they're going through. So I think my time is probably just about up. So I want to thank all of you for your contribution here today and giving us some guidance as to how we should deal with this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. So I'd like to inform the committee that we're going to have 4 other interventions before we go into the next panel. And for 5 minutes, we're going to have Frank, Mr. Caputo, Mr. Zuberi, And for 2.5 minutes, Luc Desilets and Madame Blenay. So right now, Mr. Caputo, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just repeatedly touched by all of this, and I believe it was Ms. Sevenishin who just spoke about a line of credit and credit cards and kind of living month to month. Is this just highlighting part of a bigger issue about funding for veterans, period, if that makes sense?
Are you asking me?
And
sir?
I invite Mr. Sewell. Yes, or yeah, both you and Mr. Sewell, go ahead.
It is certainly a bigger issue in the long run. No matter how hard we work, not everything's getting paid, and my credit card is getting bigger. My line of credit is getting bigger, and there's no relief. So this is much bigger than just this.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that. It pains me that anybody, whether it be someone in our armed forces, a retiree, or their partner, is having to go through something like this. Now, did anybody ever sit down? I know that my colleague MP Roberts had mentioned this, that and Mr. Boudreau answered, about he said something about being 20 years old and not dealing with this. Was there ever anything even updated to bring this to your attention, saying, look, this is what you would have to do, or this is how much it'll cost you. This is how, if you want to provide for your spouse, common law spouse, partner, this is how you're going to do it. Has any of that ever happened?
With that, no. Retirement seminars when people are releasing from the forces do not talk about this. The other situation we have to look at is the age factors of military. Now, we allow people to come into the forces up to the age of 55, and then suddenly at 60 they're out the door. So are they getting a pension? No. And if you're looking at it as a pension, yeah, that's nothing at all. So those are two factors we have. The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act is old. It needs a total revamping. It's antiquated. It affects Veterans Affairs has no word on say on it, and the military have the control on it. The military also do not allow their members to have any say in it. If you look at other organizations, the union has say on it, on their pension, where they're going. That the military don't do that. The military have. We've put a petition up on this, as you all know, and the military are not entitled to respond on a pension, so they have an even less say than that. That's military law, and that's something we can get into and spend decades discussing, but that's basically the nuts of it.
Right. Now, Corporal Sewell, you mentioned, this isn't part of the seminars. When was the last time that you attended a seminar on
I've been out of the military for a number of years. I was released at the age of 60. I have the privilege of turning 68 this year. When I was released, I didn't even get to one of these seminars because the unit I was employed by felt it was more important that I spent time doing military things at that time, which I didn't have a problem, so I didn't get to the seminar. Most people don't get to the seminars. They don't know this question. They don't even know anything about this. If you ask any serving member of the service, both the RCMP and the military, they don't have a clue about this because it's never brought up. It's one of those, let's keep it secret so nobody knows anything about it.
Well, that's an interesting point, because it's certainly not a secret. We know that. And when I say not a secret, I mean it was in the mandate letter in 2015 and 2017. So this is, it's not a secret. I can't recall offhand how many private members' bills have addressed this. I'm sure MP Blaney could probably remind me. I think 5 off the top of my head would be the number. So it isn't secret. And it surprises me even to hear that since, this was certainly on the government radar from 2015 to 2017. I'm not sure if any of the other witnesses are able, I know it's a bit of a broad question, but do any of the other witnesses know whether this has kind of crept onto the radar so that people who are in similar situations aren't dealing with this? Or is it generally consensus that, until this affects you, you don't know about it?
That's exactly what it is, Mr. Caputo. Until it affects you, you don't hear anything about it. I was very fortunate, not like Kevin, I was very fortunate. I went to 2 retirement courses, one about 4 years before I retired and another one about a year before I retired. And it was just a repeat of the same thing. They never discussed being married, being common law, age 60, none of that was ever mentioned. It was always when you retire after so many years of service, you get 2% a year up to 35 years, and that's what your pension is. Congratulations, you've reached it. But never anything about common law or dying, nothing.
I see my time is up. My hope is that the analyst can make a note of that, because when we move forward with recommendations, I think that's an important one, is not only changing, but also changing the way we communicate information. I see my time is up. Thank you all for your answers.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Samir Zuberi for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Zuberi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I have learned a lot while substituting today into this committee, and I want to share that, like many here, I also served in uniform, albeit part-time in the reserves, but I can empathize with your current situation. And I hear you, and as we all do here, we hear you loud and clear, and do care and want to make things better. And for those spouses, thank you for supporting those who have served in uniform for so long, for so many years. Your personal moral support is very important, and welcomed, I'm sure, by those who did serve. I wanted to basically just do a bit of a dive into some of the gendered aspects of things, and how 8% from the data we have, 8% of female veterans are of low income status, whereas only 4% of male veterans are of low income. Just wondering if any of the witnesses can shed some light about why, in your opinion, that female veterans are twice as likely to be low income rather than men. Would anybody like to shed some light on that?
Maybe Mr. Boudreau.
Can I?
Oh yes, please go ahead.
With that, you also have to look at the particularly the military and the RCMP is time of service. Females generally do not, up until now, have not been doing 25 years in either one of them, whereas males are. So you got to look at time in versus pension, basically and simple.
Thank you. And I was thinking of that also on my own, but we want to hear it from the witnesses too, to get it on the record. Would anybody else like to share their insights on that? I would assume that
I would have to say that based on from my experience in corrections, I can't speak about the military or the RCMP. Now that we have more women in the service working in male institutions, why there are low-income females, I really and truly don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Would you say that the pay grade that we're dealing with in terms of the retirement, the salary upon completing one's career has an impact on that, and essentially the seniority of women in the professions? Would you say that's part of it?
Well, yeah, and this is going to sound probably not correct, but like Kevin said, men seem to last a lot longer in our professions than females do. And I have no idea why. I don't know if it's family. I don't know if I just don't know. But the women don't seem to do the 20 or 25 or even 30 years of service in corrections.
Interesting. Interestingly, you mentioned about how when you retired, close to retirement, you had two courses that basically gave you a primer on what to expect during retirement, but weren't necessarily a fulsome explanation. So maybe continuing off of what you said earlier, a culture shift, or not necessarily a shift entirely, but adding to the culture might help out to make it more inclusive for women also. Do you have any
100%.
comments?
I agree. Yes. You got to remember when you go to your retirement course, they're talking about you and your spouse. They're not talking about the day you retire or 3 months later, your spouse leaves you, and now all of a sudden, here's what you can and can't do. They don't talk about that. They're talking about couples in retirement, typically. And we're
Thank
either
you.
married or we're common law. It's not, and you're always covered, so you thought.
I'll cede the half minute that's left to my colleague, Mr. Sampson.
Mr. Sanson, vous avez la parole. Il vous reste.
Mr. Sampson, you have the floor. You have 1 minute.
We've hit an interesting part. Rachel touched it, Caputo touched it, and others, that we need to find out what communication is being offered and sessions of education around this. That's a big issue. I guess my question to Corporal Sawell, very quickly, you stated that in the States 10 years ago they changed it. Do you know what the change looks like?
This change took place about approximately 10 years ago. Like I said, I'm more than willing to reach out to this gentleman again, who has already said that he has no problem talking to your committee and giving his background and his advice to you, so you can look at it too.
If you could get us that information.
Excusez-moi, Monsieur Sanson.
Mr. Sampson, you don't have your headset on, so the interpreters are having a lot of difficulty. So I'll give you another 15 seconds. Go ahead. I apologize. 15 seconds, please, Mr. Sampson.
To your colleague and anyone else and get the information to us. He may not be able to present, but if you can get the information to us, it would help our committee as we deliberate to make recommendations. Thank you.
That's no problem at all.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Président.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. And now, on to Mr. Desilets for 2.5 minutes, please. Mr. Desilets. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think at the foundation of any action or legislative measures we'd be taking, we need to base this on values, on principles of justice, of equity, of fairness. What everyone seems to be able to agree on today is that this situation is totally unacceptable. It's discriminatory. This is also outdated. And women are hit hardest. Women are hit the hardest, damn it. 90%, I believe, it was said, are the ones who are affected. Not men, it's women, and I care about that. In 2008, the Treasury Board evaluated this measure, the adjustment of this inequity, at about $1 billion. We learned last year from the Chief Actuary of Canada that it would be $300 million. So that's a huge variation. I continue to believe that if we don't have the numbers, the real numbers, it's difficult for us to think of solutions. Mr. Gill, I love your proposal, but if National Defense, which manages this fund, this amount of money, if they say no to this measure, what would your reaction be? And should the solutions not come from them? Should this really be up to you? There's about a minute left before the popsicle is raised. Over to you, Mr. Gill. If a solution like the one we propose is refused like all the rest, I don't know what can be done. This goes back years. Would we have to have the government representatives sit down so we could do a summit of all parties so we can take a multi-party, non-partisan approach to look at this damn problem. That would be my suggestion. Very interesting. But there needs to be a follow-up. We want it to be in the short term because this is just an aberration. It's so frustrating as a legislator to see this come up, as Mr. Caputo said, in 2015, 2018, I believe, in the mandate letters for the minister. It's upsetting. But perhaps the mistake is that it's not in the mandate letter. Well, it should be in the mandate letter of the National Defense Letter. Thank you. Yes, I know you've seen the popsicle stick. I hit it this time. So now, thank you. Over to Ms. Blaney for 2.5 minutes. The last speaking turn with our current witnesses. Over to you, Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I have two questions. So the first one is to all four, Patrick, Kelly, Tracy, and Kevin. We know that there is studies going on from Veterans Affairs on this issue to address their veteran survivor funds. Have you ever been invited to participate in a study? If I could start with you, Pat.
No, I've never been contacted.
Kelly?
No.
Tracy?
No.
She shook her head.
No.
And Kevin?
No.
Okay, thank you for that. That's very helpful. It will be interesting to figure out where they're getting their list from. So my last question today is really for Tracy. I'm just wondering if you could tell the committee if you were able to go to work today or not, and if you were not able to, why is that?
I went to work this morning. I rushed home so I could be here, not for you, but for Kevin. This is not easy for him to do. And so thankfully, my boss gave me that opportunity to come home. But that's also a half a day that I'm not going to get paid now. It's a twofold. Yes, you can go, but I'm not getting paid. But his mental safety is more important than that, if that makes sense.
Does make sense. So could I just hear a little bit more? Because I think this is the thing that is so important in this issue, is that the partners of the people who served our country in whatever department, there may be particular challenges that they experience. And part of us being a country that appreciates that sacrifice is recognizing the impact that it has. And I think, when I listen to this, maybe the intention in 1901 was a good intention to protect. I don't think it was really. I still think in 1901 it was sexist, but to protect vulnerable men who were in a situation that they may have needed to be protected. But now what we're seeing is in the impact for people like you, Tracy, who are spending a great deal of your time supporting someone who saved lives and supported our country. And these are the ramifications. And
Correct. I'm literally supporting him through this, as he supports me. I'm trying financially as best I can. I just started this job, but it's more when he turned and supported the country, and now the government has turned their back. I am here holding the bag to hold him up. I'm his buffer. I'm his sounding board. I'm the one that jumps in when he starts flaring up. I'm the one that has to smooth the waters. And it's tiring. And I still have to go to work. I still have 4 kids to take care of. And I am losing myself. And I am getting chipped away. And so it's not fair, I'm sorry, sir, to put a time on someone's grief, on someone's pain, on someone's circumstance. And it's very difficult. That's all I can really say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Merci, Madame Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel Blaney. Listen, on behalf of the members of the committee, I really want to thank all of the witnesses who've participated in this meeting today. It's been very touching to hear you, and thanks to you, we will be able to prepare a report with recommendations so that situation can be resolved. We've all been touched by this gold digger label. It's disappointing. So on my behalf and on behalf of committee members, I want to thank you for having participated. And Ms. Evanshin, thank you for having taken time off to come speak to us. So I'd like to remind you that we had Patrick Boudreau and Kelly Van Cognet with us, and Tracy Lee Evanshin and Kevin Sewell, Corporal, and from the Surviving Spouses Pension Fairness Coalition, Maurice Gill, Co-Chair, who presented alternative solutions. So once again, I'd like to thank you.
I just want to let you know that Kevin has passed on the email address of the American major that he's speaking up, and we'll make sure that, of course, the clerk has it.
Yeah, okay, perfect. And one intervention from Mr. Caputo before we close. We're going to go to another panel. Mr. Caputo?
I'd just like to say thank you very much, and I sure hope you guys all put your heads together and stop just running around the tree and not coming up with some kind of solution to support everybody. And Kevin, thank you for your time. Tracy, thank you for supporting him. We appreciate you both.
Thank you so much. And you will be able to see our report because I think that we're going to be able to present that before the end of the current session. So thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon. So we're going to take a break for 5 minutes in order to allow the new witnesses to come to the front. Donc, je suspends.
So I suspend the meeting for 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. income and socioeconomic well-being statistics. You will have 5 minutes to make your opening remarks, and then committee members will be pleased to ask you questions. So, I don't know, Ms. Bégin, will you be beginning? 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members, thank you for inviting us to this meeting. Statistics Canada would like to contribute to the study of the committee on the financial concerns of the Marriage Over 60 clause in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act by presenting information on the number of persons who married or entered into a common law relationship with a veteran after he or she turned 60, as well as their characteristics. This information was produced last year at the request of Veteran Affairs Canada through a secure linkage of 2018 tax records with various administrative records, including the Department of National Defence Canadian Forces Personal Cohort File and the PSPC Canadian Forces Superannuation Act Legacy File. I would like to mention that Statistics Canada's deliverable was limited to producing 4 data tables to help provide a general understanding of the population size of persons who married or entered into a common law relationship with a veteran on or after the veteran's 60th birthday and their socioeconomic characteristics. Statistics Canada was not asked anything more specific beyond that with regards to the Marriage Over 60 clause and the current committee study. Our data show that in 2018, there were between 4,000 and 6,000 persons who married or entered into a common law relationship with a veteran on or after the veteran's 60th birthday, and the veteran was still living as of 2018. There were between 2,000 and 4,000 persons who married or entered into a common law relationship with a veteran on or after the veteran's 60th birthday, and the veteran had passed away as of 2018. Spouses were generally age 60 and over. Not surprisingly, those of deceased veterans tended to be older than those of living veterans. Between 95 and 100% of spouses were women. So to simplify my summary of the results, I will now use the term spouse to describe persons who married or enter into a common law relationship with a veteran after they turn 60. Depending on the data source used, our results show that in 2018, the median income of spouses who entered into a relationship with a veteran age 60 and over ranged between $26,000 and $35,000, with spouses of deceased veterans reporting the highest median income. Survivors of veterans who entered into a relationship at age 60 or after received higher government transfers than spouses of living veterans who entered into a relationship at age 60 or after. In 2018, the median amount of government transfers received by spouses of deceased veterans reached $18,000. This compares with a median ranging between $14,000 and $15,000 of dollars for spouses of living veterans. Spouses of deceased veterans also had higher private pension income than spouses of living veterans, with a difference of about $2,000. While widowed spouses of veterans who entered into a relationship at age 60 or after had higher personal income than spouses of living veterans, they were more likely to be in a situation of low income. In 2018, the proportion of low income ranged between 19 to 23% among spouses of deceased veterans who entered into a relationship at age 60 and over, compared with a proportion ranging between 8 to 11% among spouses of living veterans who entered into a relationship at age 60 and over. The higher prevalence of low income among survivors of veterans is likely related to the fact that their spouses were more likely to be living in a one-income household. In 2018, more than 4 in 5 widowed spouses of veterans who married at the age 60 and over lived alone. The Maritimes and the province of Quebec generally had the highest proportions of survivors of veterans who entered into a relationship at age 60 and over, living in a situation of low income. Across age groups, the occurrence of low income was highest among widowed spouses aged under 60. Statistics Canada is committed to monitor trends pertaining to Canadian military life. For example, in partnership with Veteran Affairs Canada and the Department of National Defense, a report was prepared last year on pre- and post-release income of regular forces veterans. And this concludes our opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bégin. You really respected the time, well calculated. So I presume Mr. Heiss doesn't have any opening remarks, so we will now move to the question period. And now I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Fraser Tolmie to begin. 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, Mr. Tolmie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And I'd like to thank the panel witnesses for coming and joining us today. I do have a number of questions that I'd like to ask you, and understanding that you're just presenting information that you've uncovered, and so we're not going to hold your feet to the fire, if I can say it that way, but just to appreciate that this is just information that's provided. So I'd like to get a sense of how widespread this issue is. And so I'm wondering, how does the number of survivors that don't qualify for their spouse's pension compare to the number of widows that do? Would you have that information?
Please go ahead, Mrs. Bégin. Yeah.
Sorry, I was also trying to open my computer at the same time. So, Mr. Chair, the question was regarding those who qualified, correct?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that...
I can repeat the question for you.
Yes, please. That would be helpful.
Maybe buy you some time while your computer fires up there. How does the number of survivors that don't qualify for their spouse's pension compare to the number of widows that do?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for repeating the question. And yes, my computer is now turned on. So I think to answer your question, as I've said in my opening remarks, is Statistics Canada was asked for a very specific deliverable. So the information that we have presented is very limited in terms of understanding the population, the socioeconomic characteristics of those who married a veteran that was age 60 and over. So we do not have the information in terms of the spouses that would have, or the widow that would have qualified. That was not included in the record linkage that we did. I'm just going to turn to my colleague Andrew to see if he has anything to add. Thank you.
Sorry, is there any?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Hayes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, no, I agree with what Jose said. The linkage that we were asked to put together, the data that we were asked to put together, referred only to the 60 plus population. Some widows I imagine that the widows of survivors would have been of an age group younger than that if they had qualified for receiving the pension. So we weren't asked to investigate that particular part of the population.
Thank you. So I'm interested, I've got a couple of more questions here that I'd like to ask. So how does the income of survivors compare to that of those who married under 60? And does one group generally have other sources of income? No takers on that, or the mute issue?
Can we unmute ourselves,
okay.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes,
You're-
yes, yes. Do not hesitate to answer the question. Go ahead, Mrs. Bishop.
So could you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, sure. How does the income of survivors compare to that of those who married under 60? And does one group generally have other sources of income?
So thank you for repeating the question. I just wanted to make sure that I had understood all the nuances in your question. So again, the tables that we have provided to the committee, so the 4 tables we've provided, we're focusing on those who married with a veteran after the age of 60 and over. So we do not have that information available in front of us in terms of being able to speak to the various sources of income for spouses or widowed of veterans that would have married before that age.
Mr. Chair, do I have, how much more time do I have?
Yes, you know that round is 6 minutes, so you have 1 minute in a few seconds.
Okay, all right. I just, I'm very interested in your comments with regards to the Maritimes and Quebec. So I'd like to get your take on that. Did your study discover any reasons why the Maritimes and Quebec had higher proportions of survivors living in a low-income situation?
So, Mr. Chair, the question is aimed at Maritimes and Quebec. Okay. So I just want to clarify, Mr. Chair, that Statistics Canada did not conduct a study. So the work that we have done around those 4 Excel tables were really based on a cost recovery work. We were approached by Veteran Affairs Canada to prepare those tables, but we did not go into details in terms of what would be possible factors influencing the various situation of the widowed or spouses of veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Tolmie. And now let's go to Mr. Wilson Miao for 6 minutes. Please open your mic, Wilson.
I think it's me, Mr. Chair. So I just want to say good afternoon, Chair, colleagues, and thank you to our witnesses from Statistics Canada for joining us today. So for either Mr. Bégin, Mrs. Bégin or Mr. Hayes, the data shared that you shared shows the most recipients that they live in Eastern Canada, while Western Canada has much fewer pension recipients. Do you have any idea what the reason or the rationale is behind this?
Mr. Chair, I will turn to my colleague Andrew to see if he would like to answer that question.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Hayes.
I have to say, no, we don't have any particular insight into that. I can imagine that it might be associated with the distribution of veterans and persons in service across Canada. It may be related to that, but as Ms. Bégin has said a couple of times, we didn't explore the data in the way that would cause us to have come up with a definite conclusion on that question.
In your research into the income gap between men and women, or have you done anything specific that went deeper into that area? If so, what are your findings?
So, Mr. Chair, I would like to clarify the question with Ms. Valdez. Are you referring in your question to the population in general in terms of the income gap between men and women, or specifically to this population that we've covered in our Excel tables?
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Specifically to the data in your tables.
Mr. Chair, I will turn to my colleague Andrew.
Please, Mr. Andrew.
Sure, thank you. I would say that the proportion of male survivors in this data is male survivors and men who are married to a live vet at the time that we are able to see them is fairly small. Therefore, I would be quite hesitant to draw conclusions about the reasons for the differences between the incomes between the two groups.
There was a research study conducted by Stats Canada and the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research. And the findings from that was that 4,490 who were almost exclusively women would qualify for the Veteran Survivors Fund. So can you give an estimate date of when, or if you're aware of when this program could be launched, and how many would be eligible based on your research?
So, Mr. Chair, I can answer that question. So thank you for the question. We were not aware of that research. My colleague Andrew and I are expert in the terms of income-related data or socioeconomic data, so we were not involved in that particular study that you've cited. So we wouldn't be able to provide additional information in terms of the occurrence or the frequency of that study.
So I'll just change a little bit some of my questioning. So we just heard from witnesses in our previous discussion. And so what I'm reflecting on is, how many people does the current law negatively affect? If you can kind of touch on anything like that.
Mr. Chair, I will turn to my colleague Andrew.
Well, thank you for your question. Again, it's really very difficult for us to say. If I could explain in a little bit more detail of what we have here that we can talk about. What we have here is the results of an exercise wherein records for veterans and persons who in the past had received or currently are receiving a pension were integrated with other data in order so that we could see if there was evidence that they were married after 60. And then we looked at those spouses to see what their incomes were in 2018. So in some ways, that's a very simple approach. It really it tells us about the population of individuals who were able to observe in the data that would potentially be in a situation where they married after 60, and potentially could or may not be eligible for the pension program that you're interested in here. But we don't have a marker in our data that indicates whether or not the people do receive that program.
Could you speak to anything in your data or explain why women are still receiving significantly lower incomes or benefits or pensions?
So the table itself does indicate that women have lower, these are women spouses, whether it be survivors or spouses of living veterans, that they do have lower total income in 2018. And the different components of income are offered there as well. To answer your question, though, which is fairly specific, I would need to look across the table to say, okay, well, this is how much came from their earnings, this is how much came from their pensions, and I don't think you really want me to do that right now. But if you'd like me to elaborate in a follow-up message, I think there'd be a way that we could do that.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you. That's everything for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Valdez. So right now, nous allons donc poursuivre.
Now we will continue with the second vice chair of the committee, Luc Desilets. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of our witnesses. I found it complicated to go through these tables. It's not my world, it's your world, this world of numbers. So Should I understand that Statistics Canada doesn't conduct an analysis of these numbers? Is that what I should take from this? Mr. Chair, I'd like to answer the question. Thank you very much, Mr. Desilets, for your question. In this particular case here, with the 4 tables that I've mentioned, Statistics Canada didn't have the mandate to analyze them. And as I explained a little earlier, Statistics Canada often has cost recovery contracts with other departments where in a collaborative fashion we study a certain population. Statistics Canada has a number of sources of information that are very rich in data for socioeconomics and that can assist in understanding the impact, the trajectories in the labor market of certain populations. But in this case, for these tables, it was not our mandate to analyze them. I understand very well. If you were asked by the department, you could do so. Is that correct? Yes. Generally speaking, yes. We have the capacity to do that analysis and we have the tools, as long as we have access to sources of information that allow us to answer the specific question. Okay, that's clear. Personally, that would be one of my requests and recommendations, because these raw numbers aren't evocative enough for me. We need to go further as a committee to prepare recommendations that are honest and simple. Should I understand? Well, you declined our first invitation. Should I understand that it's because you only had raw data and you weren't comfortable presenting them? Is that correct? Mr. Chair, I'll answer this question. Statistics Canada, and in my particular case, I've appeared before a number of committees. We're often invited to participate in committee meetings, but in this case, when we received the request, we didn't have information. We thought it wasn't our place to come before the committee to say we didn't have information to add. So that's why we provided the tables we'd prepared with our partners at Veterans Affairs. What was the specific request that you received, not from us, but to prepare the tables you've given us? What was the initial request? Mr. Chair, I'll turn to my colleague, Andrew, who has that information. Yes, we've described the question in general, but we can also provide our copy of the letter of agreement to add it to the evidence of the committee. It describes all of the details that we used to prepare our tables. That you used. Okay, but the specific request, can we have that? Mr. Chair, I can answer. Yes, Mr. Desilets, we can provide that information. As my colleague Andrew said, we had a letter of agreement with the Department of Veterans Affairs, so it's very clear what the specific request was and how it came to us. Can we formally ask you to provide those documents, please? Both the letter of request and the rest that Mr. Andrew just described. I have another question. Why did you use 2018 data and not from last year? Mr. Chair, I can answer this as well. Usually, when we have a request for information of this type, we look at the data that are available, the latest, and as Andrew explained, we used data from taxes, so we have a file that we recreate on families. And I should say that it's probably the latest version we had available at the time when we received that information, that request. Okay, one last question. I understand why you separated the data based on living and deceased veterans, but I don't understand why there are two files, ECFM and SPAC or PSPC. What's the difference between the CFCAM and the PSPC? Mr. Chair, I can answer this as well. I only have the English acronym before me. That's okay. So for PSPC, Canadian Forces Superannuation Act Legacy File, this file has information on spouses of veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces who have received or continue to receive a pension. And the other file, the one we also refer to as the CFCAM file, has information on spouses of veterans who were identified by the department, regardless of whether or not the veteran receives a pension. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Bégin. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Now, on to Rachel Blaney for the next 6 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, of course, to the witnesses. I will do my best to ask questions that you can actually answer. I really appreciate you being here, though, and I really appreciate the content of the information that you sent us. My first question is, in the Excel spreadsheets, could you just explain to me what the gap ratio for low income means? What does it indicate and what is it measuring?
Please go ahead.
I will turn to my colleague, Andrew.
Okay.
Sure. The gap ratio represents it's an indicator that measures the quantity below the low income threshold that a person's income is. So a larger gap ratio means that individual is farther away from, on average, those individuals have a farther income away from the low income threshold. For example, if I look at the first table, PSPC Vet Alive, it indicates that the gap ratio for women is 1.6 roughly, which means that they're 60% below the low income threshold.
Okay. I'm going to try to ask this question and hopefully it makes sense. But one of the things that we've heard from the testimony is that the folks have the option to take a portion of their pension and put it away for their partner in the future. I'm just wondering, did that come up in any of the work that you had done? Do we have any data that says this percentage of veterans or this percentage of people who are impacted by this did put away money for their spouse?
Mr. Chair, on that question, browsing quickly to my notes, I would say that we don't have that information in front of us. But if that's okay, Mr. Chair, we could confirm later in writing whether or not we have the information. But I suspect that we do not have it.
Okay, thank you. That's so helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So, based on the data collection and analysis, can you just tell us a bit about the income level of spouses? I'm trying to get a sense of the poverty rates to some degree, but the other part is I'm curious if the data told us if there's any changes through different cohorts or different generations. I just know that, sometimes women who are of a certain age worked inside the home, did not work outside the home. And younger populations today tend to have both folks working. So I'm just wondering if there's any difference between those age cohorts.
And Mr. Chair, I will turn to my colleague Andrew for that question.
Thank you for your question, Ms. Blaney. I think that we would need to do more analysis to answer that question. The data that we have here presented to you shows that older survivors and older spouses of veterans who are still alive do have lower income than younger ones do. but that's fairly normal in terms of people's life course. Their incomes do get lower as they age out of the workforce and into retirement years. What we would really know is we would need to say, to answer your question specifically, is we would need to have looked at an earlier year as well. So say look at the incomes of people in 2008. And then we could have said, was a person over the age of 80, how is the income of them in 2008 compared to a person over the age of 80 in 2018? And then you could say, oh, they're better or worse off compared to that earlier year. But we unfortunately weren't asked to do that particular type of analysis. So we can't make a conclusion right now across cohorts.
Well, thank you. And I think what's interesting about talking to Stats Canada is always that reflection of what other studies we could do that would really help us comprehend these issues in a more fulsome way. So thank you for that clarity. I'm just wondering if, I know that there was an agreement and you shared the information with VAC, but I'm wondering if you shared this information with anyone else. I know, for example, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is currently doing a study on this issue. I'm wondering if that information has been shared with the Parliamentary Budget Officer or anyone else.
So, Mr. Chair, I will start answering the question. Thank you for your question. In this case, I would say that no, the information was only shared with the client. However, once we have produced information for a client, our rule, if I can say, is usually that it is available for other who would make their request for it. So I just want to confirm with my colleague Andrew, but to my knowledge, we haven't shared it with any other organization or clients.
Okay, thank you. So my last question in this section is just, you talked a couple of times about cost recovery contracts, and I think this is what that is. Could you just explain to me what that means?
So really what that means is that we do have a base budget at Statistics Canada. So we have some specific programs that we will conduct on a regular basis. However, we also have resources that are available to do additional work that may be just on an ad hoc basis or occasional basis. And that's what we call cost recovery. So we'll have clients come to us and ask us if we could undertake some work, whether it's in terms of data collection, data integration, or analysis. And then we do a cost estimates around that, and then they will provide some funding for the initiative.
Merci, Madame Bégin. Merci, Madame Blaney.
Thank you, Ms. Bégin. Thank you, Ms. Blaney. We have 4 interventions left. We will have Anna Roberts, Terence Rogers, Luc Desilets, and to conclude, Rachel Blaney.
Mrs. Roberts for 5 minutes, please. Mrs. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to pass on my questions to your favorite person, Fraser Tomaine, because he didn't finish his questions, and I know you love to hear from him, so take it away.
Oh, my friend Fraser Tomaine, the floor is yours.
Hi, Mr. Chair.
Hello.
Thank you. I had a couple of other questions that came to me and wanted to kind of leap off from the Maritimes and Quebec question that we had, and I just so a second part to that question is I had originally asked, did your study discover any reasons why the Maritimes and Quebec had a higher proportion of survivors living in a low-income situation? And so the second part to that question is, was it a dramatic difference than that of the rest of Canada? Would you be able to quantify that? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, we'll turn to my colleague Andrew for this one.
Okay.
So what I'd like to say, thank you for the question. Broadly speaking, we release income statistics at Statistics Canada annually. And it's a pretty common pattern that household incomes, so the incomes of families and individuals, is higher in Western provinces, somewhere in the middle in Ontario and BC, and lower in Quebec and the Maritime provinces. That can be due to a lot of different things, including the types of work and work environments that are available, but it also reflects in the cost of living. It's often the case that many places in the Maritimes and in Quebec have a lower cost of living than some other places in Canada. And so that brings me kind of to so that was my first point. The first point is that the pattern that we're seeing here among this particular group is fairly similar to the pattern that we see in more aggregated statistics that concern the population overall. My second point is that the low-income measure that's being used here doesn't take into account these differences in cost of living. It simply asks what proportion of Canadians in this province have an income that's low relative to the Canadian median, so lower than most other people in the country. Doesn't take into consideration cost of housing, cost of food, cost of transportation. And so again, in those cases, we often see that this particular measure, the low-income measure, shows differences with other provinces and sometimes shows higher levels. Other measures which aren't possible with this particular study, like the market basket measure, which does control for local costs, could show different results.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So similar but different. Your presentation outlined some relatively low median income levels. Okay. And now your answer has just kind of said, okay, across Canada, we've identified where there's some income differences. So how does this compare to the average income of a retired Canadian senior? The differences between the two. How would you quantify that? Would you be able to quantify that? Or did you see any trends there?
So, Mr. Chair, I can start answering the question, and I'll turn to my colleague Andrew if he has anything to add. To answer specifically the question, that was not part of the request that we received from Veteran Affairs Canada. So in order to answer that question specifically, like doing the comparison to the rest of the Canadian population who are retired, we would have to get back to the committee.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes, if you had something to add.
Thank you, Mr. Tolmie. No, I would only echo what Ms. Bejan said. Certainly, we would have the data to provide a comparator if you were interested in looking at similar populations that would be comparable using the same data.
I think
my friend told me in 30 seconds.
At least you gave me a warning. Okay,
I'm generous. I said 30 seconds.
Well, it is a Friday afternoon. Well, then I'll just end off that I would say that my suspicions are that there's a similar trend, and that I would love to see what the difference is between a retired, Canadian vet is compared to other seniors, but that's for another time. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for allowing me extra questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tolmie. So now let's go to Mr. Charles Rogers for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. It's good to hear some of the information you're providing to us. But I've got more questions, I think, than we have time for. But in the meantime, I would like to comment on the mandate, the scope of your study, and what that means, of course, to what we're trying to accomplish here and decisions we're trying to make. So how do you see your tables that you've put together being useful to this committee in assessing the appropriateness of maintaining or abolishing the marriage after 60 clause. So either one of you would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can answer the question. So as I've explained earlier, when we first received the request to appear to the committee, my colleague Andrew and I looked at the request and we felt that we did not have specific information. In spite of all the data that we have at Statistics Canada, we felt that we didn't have the information that you were looking for. The tables that we've provided to the committee only explain the population that would or could be eligible. So we know that the data that we've provided does not provide you the picture or specifically what you're looking for, but only the universe or the base of understanding the socioeconomic profile of spouses of veterans, whether they are still alive or they are deceased.
So, yeah, I understand fully. And so it leaves me contemplating what the purpose of the research was in the first place, that it was so narrow in its mandate, and how it might inform the committee so that we can make a good decision, make a solid recommendation on this particular issue to Veterans Affairs or to government, and whether we need to do, I guess, gather more information from a more comprehensive study. I'm assuming that's where you'd want to go.
So, Mr. Chair, I can answer the question. In terms of what Statistics Canada would or where we would want to go, I think I'd like to reframe that in terms of what we can do to support. The role of the statistical agency is really to provide information to policymakers, to Canadians about a wide variety of topics that impact the Canadian society and businesses in Canada. So in this particular cases, for us to provide you with the information, the piece of the puzzle that is missing, if I could say, we would need to have more information in terms of the spouses that would have applied for the specific the specific benefit that you're studying at this moment.
Thank you. And I'm curious because a previous witness said that the U.S. canceled what they called a gold digger clause 10 years ago. And I'm just curious as to what kind of information that they had gathered to make that kind of a decision. And we're requesting now, if we can, to be able to get access to that particular information. Are you aware of any of the information that they have in the U.S. that informed their decision?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to answer the question. No, unfortunately, Statistics Canada does not have any information that would explain the data that was used in the U.S. to make that decision.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, that's the extent of my questions today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Rogers. And now let's go to Mr. Desilets pour
2.5 minutes, please, Mr. Desilets. Thank you. 2.5 minutes plus what Mr. Caputo gave me, that makes 4 minutes. No. According to your study, the median income of spouses in a relationship with a veteran of over age 60 is about $26,000 and $35,000, if I'm not mistaken. You say that the proportion of low-income spouses was 19 to 23% for spouses of deceased veterans. I'd like for you to elaborate on what that low income is due to. What is the amount? We work with other types of data often, But what is low income for you? Mr. Chair, I'll turn to my colleague Andrew, who can answer the question. Thank you for the question. In this case, the low income measure used is the low income measure. It's the same name, and it's set at 50% of the median Canadian income for Canadian families. And then it's adjusted to family size. So there's a specific network that's different for each family size. And then we look at current income and we compare that to the threshold to define whether it's a low income situation. Can you tell me how much that would be approximately? Could you repeat the question? That income, I understand the calculation you're doing, but the average income you're using would be about what? I think I can understand the question. There are income thresholds. We can provide them, the income thresholds that are used in this study. It's available on our website, but we can provide it for the committee. If you can send them to us, we would appreciate that. Within that calculation for income, does the guaranteed income supplement appear? In a few seconds. The guaranteed income supplement, is that included in the calculation? Perhaps I don't understand the question. Ms. Bégin, could you? So the question is whether the guaranteed income supplement is included in the total income we use. Yes, exactly. Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, the answer is yes. It's okay. So we look at all income sources based on family size. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. And I will conclude with Ms. Blaney. 2.5 minutes to conclude this meeting. Go ahead.
Chair. And thank you again, the witnesses. I've found you very helpful, so I'm really glad you did come, and I understand why you were not sure if you should. So my next question is, when was this data provided to VAC, and what department or who in VAC was it delivered to?
Monsieur le Président, je vais me tourner vers mon collègue.
Mr. Chair, I will turn to my colleague Andrew because he's really the one who has the information on the letter of agreement.
Andrew, t'es en sourdine.
Andrew, you're on mute.
Je suis désolé. J'ai
I'm sorry.
agreement here beside me. For Veterans Affairs Canada, the signatory was Crystal Garrett Baird. And the date that it was received, well, we have our deliverable date was towards the end of the fiscal year 2020-2021, but I'd have to look into the exact date that it was delivered.
Okay, thank you.
Before the end of March 2021.
Okay, thank you. And I know we're getting a copy of that letter, so thank you. I wasn't sure if it was on there or not. I guess my last question is just around who can access the information. And so what I mean by that is, we've had a lot of questions come up from different members here today. So I'm wondering, can MPs or committees approach Stats Canada and say, could you get this information for us? Or is it really just like ministers and departments that can ask for that sort of task?
So, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais...
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to clarify the question with Ms. Blaney, if possible.
When you say this task, do you mean in general?
Yes, I just mean in general, because
yes.
Just after I heard all of the ideas of how we could compare, for example, to 2008, I'm just wondering if committees or MPs have the capacity to say, actually, that would be great. Can you do that for us? Or does it have to come from a minister or department?
So, Mr. Chair, I can answer the question. Statistics Canada get a lot of requests for data, for insights. We do also get requests from Parliament members. So there is, this happens via the Library of Parliament usually and our parliamentary affairs. And then it is directed to the subject matter that are specialists in that domain. So in general, we do get a lot of data requests via our website, but in the case of Parliament, as I said, it would go via the Library of Parliament.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Madame Blaney, vous pourriez peut-être.
Ms. Blaney, perhaps you can plan to make a request. I'm losing my voice. Excuse me. So, on that note, we will conclude this meeting. I'd like to thank witnesses from this second panel on behalf of committee members and myself. From Statistics Canada, we had with us José Bégin, Director General, Labour Market, Education and Socioeconomic Wellbeing, and Andrew Heiss, Director, Centre for Income and Socioeconomic Wellbeing Statistics. So your presence was very important for us because we wanted to have a full study to prepare our recommendations. So on that, I see that it is getting late. I'd like to inform committee members that on May 20th, we will continue with this study on survivor pension benefits, and we will have Veterans Affairs Canada officials, Treasury Board of Canada officials,
Department of National Defense officials, and the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research. Je veux prendre aussi.
I'd also like to take the time to thank the whole team that has been with us, the clerk, the interpreters, and the technical team. And I'd like to know if committee members agree to adjourn this meeting. No objections? So the meeting is adjourned. Have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.